Hello, everyone, and welcome. You are here for session 4 of the Advocacy in Focus series presented by the National Trust for Historic Preservation Leadership Forum and the Main Street America Institute. Thank you for joining us today. Today's program is on media communications for advocacy campaigns. I'm Kelly here at Main Street America, and before we get started, I just want to give you a little bit of a heads up about how to participate. First off, if you are dialed into the audio via telephone, you can also use the audio on your computer if you prefer. You have an option to switch between audio formats on the audio section of your control panel. Also, we invite you to ask questions during today's program of our speaker and panelists. At any time, you can use the question or chat function on your control panel to type a message in. I'll be monitoring that and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. You may also receive a question from one of our speakers today to respond to via the chat function. So if you are paying attention to the program, please be aware that there may be a question, and the best way to respond to that would be to type into the chat function so that we can get an idea of who's with us today. We also want to make sure that you are aware of the fact that this program is part of a 5-session series, a course through the Main Street America Institute. If you maintain week to week of the course, complete the quiz following the course, you will be able to receive credit towards the Main Street America Institute's Leadership Development Certificate. We'll have more opportunities for earning credit in that certificate, including a leadership development workshop coming up this fall. So please stay engaged with us. We'll follow up with all attendees for more information on that. In about 48 hours after this session concludes, you'll be able to review the recording of this session via your InReach account. So at mainstreet.inreachce.com, you'll be able to go log in there with the account you created when you registered and go back, review the session, find any of the materials, and find the quiz that follows this session. Please note that you do have in your handout section today the PDF of these slides, as well as in a 3 slide per page note-taking format. And you'll also have the updated advocacy toolkit for media communications there. So we encourage you to download and read that as a companion to today's program. So we have 3 speakers today, and I will wait to introduce Megan Baku and Peggy Moretti later in the program. But I want to start out by introducing Rebecca Morgan. Rebecca is the Senior Director for Media Communications and Media Communications and Advocacy in the Department of Public Policy at NAFSA. So prior to that, she served as the Associate Director of Public Affairs for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, where she managed national advocacy and public relations campaigns. In previous positions, she's managed communications, public relations, and marketing of all programs, products, and services of a National Health Professions Education Association. She also served as the liaison between county citizens, facility patrons, political figures, board members, media representatives, and the organization. She has a BA in communications with a minor in Spanish from George Mason University, and she later obtained her MA in public administration from Webster University. So a ton of background and experience to bring us up to date on media communications for our advocacy campaigns. Welcome, Rebecca. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you so much, everyone, for allowing me to share a little bit about my role with you. Really excited to do so because, as I tell people all the time, the media can be our friend. Really. So, as Kelly said, I am the Senior Director for Media Relations and Advocacy at NAFSA, Association of International Educators. And what we do at NAFSA is we try to help students study abroad, whether it's U.S. students studying abroad at other schools and universities around the world, or it's international students and scholars coming to the U.S. But what makes me really exciting in my own mind right now is that I was the Associate Director for Public Affairs at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So I was so fortunate to work with people like you and to help, I hope, save places that matter. I'm very passionate about preservation. I'm very passionate about the history that it lets us live. And I'm very passionate about allowing my children to actually see the places that shaped our history and our world. So again, thank you. So let's start a little bit about talking about what this is. What is media advocacy? Well, media advocacy is not rocket science. It is the strategic use of mass media to advance public policy initiatives. Super simple, right? It's rooted in the ideas behind community advocacy and has the goal of promoting healthy public policies. Seems pretty simple. So, now, this is a little different from your traditional mass media strategy. Oftentimes, you'll know traditional media the approach here is to try to fill the knowledge gap. In other words, to educate people and to provide them with information as to what's going on. The media advocacy, however, addresses the power gap. How can we shape what's happening right in our world and change policies to help move things in a more positive direction? Essentially, improvements in historic preservation are believed to come about primarily from gaining more power over the policy environment rather than simply gaining more knowledge about historic sites. Just because I enjoy historic sites doesn't mean I'm going to be able to help preserve them unless we have policies that can make that happen. And that's why media advocacy is so key. Again, it shifts from the personal to the social, the individual to the political, and from the behavior or practice to the policy environment. These are key as you're trying to help shape the future. So, anyone can be a media advocate. I personally am one, and I professionally am one, and I'm welcoming you to try it as well. As a media advocate, you can inform the public about what really causes or contributes to the loss of historic elements in a community, for example. Or you can recast problems such as environmental issues. I know at the National Trust, I worked with many to talk about sea level rise and why that's important for historic buildings and cities and communities, and how that's impacting our historic preservation. And as a media advocate, you can encourage other professionals and community members to find out more about historic preservation and development issues in general, and to get involved. And getting involved is key. Okay, so when should we focus on the media? I mean, we can advocate all the time, right? So when should we jump into talking about the media? Well, a great idea is during the announcement of a new project or breaking news. These things can be really newsworthy, and oftentimes they can allow the media to feel like they're brought in on a news story that will help them, of course, do their jobs and help you do yours. Another time you should focus on the media is when you have information that can be tied to community news. If something's local, if something's happening in your area, if there's a building that needs help, or quite frankly, a community center that would maybe work better in a historic building right around the corner, there may be some opportunity to get the media involved and talk about that move or how we can strengthen this particular part of our community. Another time you can get the media involved, or when you should focus on the media, is when using an opportunity for publicity. I know recently we had some publicity around some elections, and we will again. An opportunity to get the media involved is, what if there's a town hall in your area? Isn't that a great opportunity to ask a question about historic preservation? Maybe the federal historic tax credit and how these particular potential elected officials feel about historic preservation and what your community needs, or what the whole country needs if it's on the federal level. And when an issue has reached crisis proportions is something we often talk about when you get the media involved. This is a scary moment. Maybe people don't know it's a crisis. Maybe people don't know about downtown, and now we have, during COVID, we have some places that are in danger of losing their historic elements or other things like that. But people don't know that it's happening, and the media can help tell that story. And it also, with this type of advocacy, the media can help you find ways to fix it or to share those ways so that, again, you can get people to advocate. Another opportunity is when there's a difference between the adoption of a rejection of a law or a regulation that you support or disagree with. These are great opportunities for connecting with the media and helping them share that story. And of course, never forget, when you've achieved something important. Never let good news go to waste either. So, how do you pitch the media? Not rocket science. I'd love to tell you my job is super hard, but the truth is, most of the time, it's about building relationships. Know the reporters you're working with. What beat are they on? What did they deal with? What did they report on? Do a little research. And remember, always be helpful. When you start to build a relationship with a reporter, help them get the information they need as well. Giving the media what they need to do their jobs will then help them want to help you get out the message. Be available when you're needed, be trustworthy, and always be accurate. If you don't know, say so. There's nothing wrong with not knowing the answer, and that's the best way to build your credibility. Not making up something, because to be honest, that'll ruin a relationship faster than anything, and I think that's just basic people 101. And always alert the media to stories relating to your issue that they might be interested in. Have they researched and done some great work around these issues before? Have they told some stories and now there's a follow up? These are good opportunities for working with them and how to pitch them something you need them to know about. And quite frankly, center on you as the expert. All right. So now that you're thinking about working with the media, what are some goals you should think about? Well, agenda setting is key. Let the media and the public know what your concerns are. Start by telling them what the agenda is and what needs to be discussed. Oftentimes, there are lots of elements that people don't think about. There are lots of new directions, and sometimes people only have one version of a story. This is key, especially in historic preservation. Sometimes people just see, sadly, an old dilapidated building. But as preservationists, we see the future and the past together. So let's talk about that and let's see what we can do to get the media to understand that and to share that. Also, get the general public to acknowledge that your issues are important. Nobody wants a downtown that can be revitalized and isn't. Everybody wants a community that's safe and walkable and a place to raise a family if you choose to do so. So this will get people talking about what's important to you by getting them talking about what's also important to them. We all want to revitalize community. So generate also some positive action. You got people protesting, or you got people saying how great this is. Community cleanups. There are opportunities here for getting everybody involved, and the media loves to tell the positive story and also the supportive story, where people are supporting something that's important in your community. And remember, shape that debate. Don't let the story run away. Make sure that you have your talking points in order and that you're ready to talk about what this means. I remember, as I mentioned earlier, the National Trust was working on sea level rise and some other things that talk about damages to historic buildings and how important it is to restore buildings. Then a study came out that the National Trust supported. And it talked about how if you revitalize a building, you're actually doing better for the environment than if you tear it down and rebuild a new one. Well, that's news and data no one ever had. And that just proves the value of historic preservation, not only on the financial side, but more importantly, even on the environmental side. And that is key. So again, shaping that debate, turning a new story, an old story into a new story is very helpful. And most importantly, you want to advance a policy as a goal of working with the media. Just giving them a problem will not help you move policy. You've got to tell them some great opportunities for taking action. I know we've talked a little bit about HR 2 bill and getting that introduced in the Senate. These are policies that could be advanced to help historic preservation, and we should work through media advocacy to do so. All right, so there's also social media. When do we do that? Why would we do it? Better question, friends, why wouldn't we do it? Social media should always be paired with traditional media. It helps you give your story some legs. Don't be afraid of the Twitters, as my mom would say. Be out there, talk about your issues, keep them in the forefront. There are lots of different platforms to use. As you probably well know, the most common are Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Starting out on these and helping your cause be known is key. And then if you get some great media stories, you can push those out. Now, I wonder, has anyone seen some media advocacy campaigns that really worked? If so, could you share those in the chat box? Also, have you seen some that maybe didn't work so well? Can you share those as well? Love to talk a little bit about why those worked and why those didn't. And if you think about that, that'll help you shape your future media advocacy campaign. I know recently we talked, as we all know, a great congressman just passed away. And his crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, as we all know, watching, then Mr. Lewis, now former Congressman Lewis, and watching him cross that bridge would never have been known if we didn't have a great media advocacy campaign. As many may not know, the media had never really covered a peaceful protest like that before. And they had never covered dogs being set on protesters and the hoses, etc. That had actually never come through the media before. When it did, it shaped the entire country. After that, I think many of us know that the whole country, from sea to shining sea, including Hawaii, had representatives at the next march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I think that's an example of a phenomenal media advocacy campaign. This is the spark in what became the civil rights struggle, at least for some. Of course, we know about many other things, the Montgomery bus riots, etc. But this media advocacy piece was crucial to changing and shaping the hearts and minds of Americans across the country. And that's what the media can do to help a situation. That's how the media can help you start talking about important policies that we need to make America even better. Kelly, can you go ahead and move that once for me? Thank you so much. All right. I personally had a really cool media advocacy win recently. I'm not sure if you heard, but recently the Department of Homeland Security decided that international students and scholars could not come to a university or college that had only online teaching. Well, this was a concern for universities and colleges alike. There was a concern that universities and colleges administrators couldn't make their own decisions about the health and well-being of their campuses and communities. And there was a concern for students and scholars that they would have to choose between their health or being deported if they wanted to study here in the United States. International students and scholars bring $41 billion to the US economy. They also bring community help, revitalization, and all sorts of great things that help us build future leaders in other countries right here in the US. Well, this sparked a tremendous amount of backlash. I don't know if you saw, but our friends at Harvard and MIT, they sued. NAFSA, the association I'm in, filled out an amicus brief and submitted it. And before the judge could rule, the administration backed off and said, we rescind that guidance because we hear you and we heard your media advocacy campaign. All of the major news outlets pushed out this story, and it helped, quite frankly, students feel safe in the country that they just want to learn in. And again, this is a great example of how the media can be helpful and can be our friend if we learn to give them the information they need to tell the story. And again, we set the agenda. All right, Kelly. Okay, so it sounds like a lot, but don't fear. You can do this. This is easy. Be honest, be appreciative when you get good coverage, and be appreciative when you get good policy change. These things will happen, and you can do it. Also, stay strategic. Connect with the right media reps when you're trying to tell your story. If they're not working on preservation issues or community issues and things that you want to talk about, maybe don't build that relationship with them or try to pitch them that story. But constantly building a relationship with them, and I'm not talking about a friendship, but getting to know what they report on and being helpful is key. And it will allow you to help tell your story and advocate and have others help you advocate too. And again, please, please continue to protect the places that matter to all of us. The media can really be helpful in getting your story out and helping you move policy. And I want to thank you so much for your work to save the past and enrich the future. We need you. So please keep advocating. Kelly? All right. I think the next person who's going to speak is Megan. Hi, Megan.
Hi there.
Awesome. Fantastic. Kelly, did you want to introduce Megan?
Sure thing, and welcome, Megan. Thank you for being here. And Rebecca, thank you so much for those wonderful words of encouragement and advice on communicating with the media. I want to introduce Megan Baku, whose pronouns are they, them, theirs. Megan is the Director of Communications at Preservation Maryland, the state's largest and oldest nonprofit dedicated to Maryland's history and heritage. Megan is an inaugural fellow of the Arcus Preservation Leadership Program and the Baltimore Planning Academy. They earned an MS in Historic Preservation from Clemson University and the College of Charleston, and a BA in Environmental Design from State University of New York, Buffalo. Previously, Megan was acting president of Preservation Action and a historic preservation specialist at Clinton Brown Company Architecture. At Preservation Maryland, Megan leads the organization's state and national communications, including major programs like the Campaign for Historic Trade, Smart Growth Maryland, and PreserveCast. Welcome again, Meg.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you, Rebecca, for those great tips that all preservationists should keep in mind. And congratulations on your recent win, which I think is a win for many people. So thank you on that. And thanks for the great introduction. So again, it's Megan from Preservation Maryland, and I'm going to jump right into probably the worst day of my life. That's an exaggeration, but I'm a preservationist. So in 2013, I had recently graduated from grad school. I was living in Buffalo, New York, which is where I'm from. I was working as a preservation specialist at a local architect's office. And as a good citizen that many of us preservationists are, I got involved in a really important grassroots fight to save the Bethlehem Steel Administration Building just over the city border in Lackawanna, New York, from Buffalo, New York. And this is happening in 2011 through 2012, 2013. This was a fantastic grassroots group. These are the groups that you've either been a part of or you support as a professional preservationist, and certainly the people who may not be, professionals, but are sustaining places that are important to them. So we had everything. We had media coverage. We had a website. We had a lawyer. We had an alternative engineering report. These, sometimes these things don't ever coalesce around a single project. But it was just this kind of just amazing confluence of people working on this structure. And I'll say that it was grassroots led. At the time, the local preservation group was not a very robust group. And because we were over the border, there were also some other concerns and issues, right? So we didn't have those connections that kind of Rebecca's talking about in terms of getting to know your elected officials in Lackawanna, even though it seems like it's right over the border. So come 2013, worst day imaginable, this beautiful stone 1901 structure just comes down, becomes a pile of rubble. First, they pluck the beautiful ornamental dormers out, just kind of as a, hey, there's nothing you can do about it. This is coming down. And so I start with this really terrible story to say that now that I work at a statewide historic preservation group, I wonder, how can I help those groups now that I was a part of? And is Preservation Maryland providing those resources that small grassroots group's needs. So if anybody was paying attention, just about this time last year, another terrible day in a preservationist life, there was a complete surprise demolition of 2 stone buildings in the Woodbury neighborhood of Baltimore. No warning, no nothing. Preservationists had been working on it, and I'll say preservationists, actually the neighborhood was working really strongly on it. And besides being heartbroken about it and feeling like personally and professionally, like how did this happen on our watch? What can we do as Main Street advocates and preservation advocates? Well, Preservation Maryland has been working to become a trusted source of information for quotes, for great images, for press, and also for people to turn to our website and pull content directly from our website. So as soon as those houses came down, we had a statement up there. And so what I'm saying there is, because we acted quickly, we were able to put out a statement. And so that social media and that self-created media then is an impetus for your earned media. And we focus on that a lot at Preservation Maryland. We create a ton of content. And what I truly believe is, because we helped create that content, we became a trusted source. And so think about when people get to you or your website, what information is there and what makes that person's job easier. Like Rebecca was saying, how do you make it easier for the reporter? The other thing I think is kind of, well, a silver lining that came out of the destruction of these stone houses. It created a whole new spark about people caring and talking about local historic districts. Usually people are talking about, oh, no, don't worry. It's not a local historic district. It's a National Register district. And you get a tax credit, but you don't have to do anything. And it's honorific. But here was this great opportunity to revisit this kind of interest in a local historic district. And so even though this was happening in Baltimore as a statewide, we were able to use that to say, maybe we need to look at this in different regions of the state too, and use this as an example. And not to turn to it and say, this isn't what you want to happen, although that's kind of it. But what can we do with this kind of new spark where neighbors are asking for a local historic district? And another point about the kind of creating media versus earned media. So because we became that trusted source, our executive director, Nicholas Redding, who hosts the podcast, is fantastic. He's a fantastic speaker, writer, researcher, and podcast host. And so when he has the opportunity to submit an op-ed, we were able to put one in about the land swap, about the national park that may or may not become a certain football team's new space for a stadium. We've also had great op-ed opportunities to talk about the historic tax credit. So kind of creating those opportunities from becoming a trusted source and becoming a liaison between, as a statewide, to our local groups. I will say, kind of, there are still things we can be doing better. I'm always, as that little, activist in a lot of us, I wish Preservation Maryland could do more. We could be out there saving, you get amped up into these, hearing about these communities really trying to save, a certain space, and you're just like so jazzed about it. It's so cool. But you have to trust that what you're doing as an organization is also helping to save thousands of buildings instead of just that one building. So what we like to do is then create that larger, at least statewide, if not national, conversation about it that then our local partners can use and use us as a trusted source. So in closing, that concept of creating the content and then using that to become a trusted source, to me, is really important and has been a linchpin in helping create the earned media. Although I could do a lot more, and I think it's always a learning game. I'd also focus on celebrating places as much as the bad news stories or the 11th hour kind of thing. So I think that's critically important, and we really focus on good news stories. And honestly, they probably do the best on social media. And then also to trust the fact that what you're doing as a preservationist, as more of a professional preservationist, truly has the opportunity to help save thousands of buildings. You should, and we do, still try and save one at a time. But in terms of this kind of media policy, it really does have the opportunity to enact that kind of change. And when you are heartbroken about, a single loss, or just like super jazzed about, something great and something being saved in rehab, use your largest megaphone to get that news out there, and you'll become that trusted source that's so important for media advocacy.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for those wonderful and wise words. Always good to hear about good news.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Now I want to also invite our next panelist speaker to the program, Peggy Moretti. Peggy, welcome.
Hi.
Peggy
How are
Moretti.
you? Thanks for having me.
Peggy, I'm going to introduce you really quickly. Peggy brings over 20 years experience as a marketing executive and business entrepreneur to her role as executive director of Restore Oregon, where she served since 2009. She's so grateful for the opportunity to combine her previous experience with a passion for placemaking and preservation, especially as it evolves to serve all communities. In addition to leading Restore Oregon, Peggy has served on numerous commissions and boards and is the proud owner and steward of the Louis G. Hunder House, listed on the National Register of Historic Preservation. Peggy, welcome. Thank you for joining the conversation, and we'd love to hear a little bit about your experience.
Well, thank you for having me. I was trying to figure out how best to focus my remarks because I really do feel that our ability to use the media, well, communication is obviously at the core of everything we do here. And even though I came out of a marketing background, it's been quite a learning curve for me to kind of get into this advocacy role that we're so much involved in as a statewide. I was thinking here, I have a couple of examples and a success and a failure I was going to share, but I have a couple of takeaway thoughts. First and foremost is, to me, it's really coming more and more clear that preservation and our ability to have an impact is really about people. And people is becoming a mantra inside our organization. And along with that is relationships, because I think there are times where we have the best argument in the whole wide world, but if we don't have the relationships with the folks that we need to reach, it bounces off of the clatter and the clamor of our lives these days. So I kind of wanted just to share that kind of, maybe it's a little bit of a duh, but for me it's like, okay, yeah, it's not about how cool this building is or its history as much as it's about the people who care about it, the people who are trying to save it, and what the benefit is to the community. So making sure that our message that we are rolling out across all this media has that really good essence. And sometimes, especially when we've been working on policy issues a lot, Oregon, some of you may know, is the only state that has a statewide owner consent requirement before anything can be designated. And it is just the worst possible starting point. And we also lack a state historic tax credit. So we're trying to address these really, really big things, and they get very, very geeky. And so part of our challenge is also making our message straightforward and in lay people's terms. And what does it mean to you in your community, in your neighborhood, and then what does it mean to the legislator and their constituents? So message of all of these things is really a tricky thing. And I'm going to share two examples of things that one we had, I think, a rousing success, and one it's like we'll live to fight another day, but something just kind of petered out. The success I'm going to speak to was about 18 months, almost 2 years ago, we defeated a bill. We weren't trying to pass something, we were trying to stop something. There was a bill in the Oregon legislature that had its genesis in good intentions, but was going to have a devastating impact on historic districts and the acceleration of demolition. And that's been a huge issue here in our state, is that with the rapid growth and the striving to create greater density in our urban cores, is put a big bullseye on a lot of historic resources, and if they don't have some protection. they're just demolished and replaced with some very ubiquitous nondescript buildings. So there was a bill that was going to basically strip any protections against some of these demolitions out of our historic districts and historic neighborhoods. The idea was they wanted to promote density, and they thought historic districts were kind of hoity-toity and you know, everybody should be sharing the goals of densification, which of course we had to message that yes, historic districts can be infilled and there can be density and there can be ADUs and there can be wonderful ways that we contribute to that effort, but let's avoid demolition and let's not put a law in place that was going to effectively give great incentive to demolish more buildings and all of the environmental impact that would have. But it took us a while to hone our message down to the layperson's level, and our strategy involved not only a press release to the media with whom we had established some relationships with key reporters in both the business and real estate arenas and the developer arena, and then we had one of our associates, or wasn't a staffer, it was actually a member, wrote an op-ed that was published in the main newspaper here. But along with that, we had a very robust online and social media campaign where we made our case, put it out in our newsletter, put it out in social media, had an actual sign up where people could identify who their legislator was and send emails. We really just tried to really fill the legislators' boxes with emails based on our key messages, and provided, you know, sample language and so forth, as we've seen many other organizations do. But one of the things we learned was how important it was to time this correctly. It wasn't going to be helpful if we threw a bunch of constituent communications at legislators before they were really thinking about that bill. Where was it in the kind of the queue of the legislation? So we did manage to time it within just a few days of before it was going to come before first the committee and then the larger vote. And the good news is that they went, whoa, I didn't know so many people cared about historic districts, and what's this all about? And no, I don't want to ruffle my constituents' feathers. And the weight of the opposition and the arguments that were raised was successful, and basically just the bill went away. It never went to fruition. And actually a different bill came back in the next session that did not seek to strip protections out of historic districts, and had a much more nuanced and balanced approach while still supporting density and other good urban planning. So that was one success. We had, it was probably a little more on the social media side that helped get it over the edge, over the finish line, but it definitely was supported by the articles and the coverage that we got. A more recent, I'll call it a failure, was an attempt that we made to change Oregon's owner consent law. And we really, I have to say, we struggled when you're dealing with something that's really, really geeky, you know, down in the geeky technical side of preservation, that it takes too long to describe it, and to net it down into a nice little statement. We tried to explain that if you're requiring owner consent, you're going to, and somebody doesn't, and some developer just bought this great historic building, which we had an example of, a wonderful historic fraternal lodge in downtown Portland, was allowed to kind of just go into some decay, and it was purchased by a developer, and they were seeking to demolish it and put up an office building. And one of our local nonprofit housing developers had assessed the building and said, oh, no, we could turn that into affordable housing. And we're going, that would be a much better idea than demolishing it. But because of owner consent, that, you know, there was no way to stop this demolition, unfortunately. And we were trying to use that as an example of, you know, trying to get people kind of rallying around this idea that a community should have a say in what are the historic places that are important to them and that should be protected. But we found we just couldn't get traction. We couldn't And another thing that happened that I think is an interesting phenomenon right now, I don't know if other folks who have developed relationships with various reporters and media representatives have found that it's a real revolving door right now. You build a relationship with a reporter and 6 months later they're gone. And so keeping those relationships cultivated and strong has been a bit of a challenge. But anyway, we tried to bring some legislation forward and found that we were also suffering from insufficient relationships with the legislative body itself, other than a few folks that are somewhat closer into our headquarters here in Portland. So it just never got out of committee, this bill, and we hope to revisit it at the right moment. But it taught us some great lessons about, again, having to hone a message in a way that makes people care, that isn't too technical, that isn't too ephemeral, I guess. That effort of staying on top of who's the latest person covering that particular subject for the newspapers, with the revolving door in the media right now, and investing, finding out enough ways to cultivate the relationships with the legislature so that they're not meeting us for the first time when we're knocking on their door with our lobbyists to say, hey, we've got this really important legislation. If they don't know us and they don't understand and have a confidence in us as and our credibility, you don't get very far during the legislative session. So, and I will admit that for Restore Oregon, we're a statewide organization with a very large geographical state and a very small staff still. So it has been challenging to have the capacity and time and resources to invest in that relationship building. But it's one of our priorities now, I can tell you. So I guess those are some of the experiences that we've had. Lots to learn, lots of, I think particularly having the right messaging at this moment and being able to do it clearly and in a positive, constructive, here are some solutions way is very important. So with that, I'll pause. Let's see, whatever questions or whatever. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Peggy. Now I'd like to make sure to invite our previous speakers, Megan and Rebecca, back on screen so that we can address any questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, to chat into the chat function, we'll pay attention to it there and we can address it. We do have a stop time in our program of typically about 45 minutes, but if there are questions, we'd love to pause for a few moments and address those with the entire program. So if people are thinking about it, I will just throw one out. And I just want to get everybody's opinion on this. Best practices on talking to reporters. I think Peggy did a good job of trying to tell us how to be clear with our messaging, but I know that anytime you're faced with somebody where you might be on the record, things can go haywire in what you think you're saying versus how it comes out on the other end. Any tips?
Go straight to the expert, Rebecca, on that one.
Well, let's hope I can give a good answer. A couple of key things. Get your talking points together ahead of time. Be ready with what you want to say. And remember, you don't have to answer their questions. You can talk about what you want to talk about. To some degree, I mean, granted, if you answer none of their questions, they'll probably never call you back. But if you can help reframe the question in a way that helps you tell the story you need to tell, that can really be helpful. And the only way to do that is to really know your talking points ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. Every time, what I've kind of learned to do, if possible, is if a reporter calls, you don't have to talk to them right that second. You can take 5 minutes and call them back and pull your talking points together and write them down, so that you make sure you make those points. And where you can, if you're like, I'm sure most of us do, we're tracking stories in the media, and if you can relate something that they're asking about back to a story or a larger topic, I think that really helps too.
Excellent.
Also, you can ask them for questions in advance too. One more thing, a little tip. Sometimes they'll send them, sometimes they don't, but it can get your your juices flowing in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. I want to ask a question from the audience as well. Do you think social media posts are still effective if you are not in the habit of posting regularly? For example, if you only post when you have something specific going on?
No. I actually think there's a bigger question there. Why isn't your organization using social media? I think there's a lot of tools now that really help create scheduled posts. And it's actually something that Preservation Maryland recently invested in and has really changed. I, at some point, was handling like 12 to 13 handles just because of the growth of the organization. We're insane. But it really is better. And there is that when you are in charge of an organization's social media and you're not posting, I totally feel that, like, that pressure on your shoulders of like, oh, I didn't post today, it's a Saturday. And there are a lot of tools to do that. So I would just say, get into the habit of doing it and making sure that you do have that megaphone ready for when you need it. And that's where it's kind of saying the balance between good things and bad things and fun stories and public history and images. It is a balance. Or if you don't have a great social media audience, do one of your partners have a strong audience? So I know for some of our smaller organizations, if we can share and give them our advocacy tools and we can blast it out for them, then that's a great use of our capacity to help that. So it sounds like you either need a big SIB up there to help you, or try and cultivate that audience so that when you do need them, that you're trusted and they know to look for advocacy information from you. Easier said than done, though.
Mm-hmm. And don't be afraid to mix in fun stuff. I mean, people want positive news and people focused. We're trying to just do little tiny profiles of preservationists among us. Just regular folks who have taken on a little project of some sort. And I think it's important that we're not just talking heavy stuff. People should enjoy and want to see us come up in their feed.
Wonderful. Well, I want to just invite any final comments that you all have to our audience before we close out the program. It's been wonderful to have all of your experiences brought to the table here to share. And certainly we've learned some using good news and expanding your audience through partnerships and really making sure that you're communicating clearly. I think those are all amazing takeaways for today.
Thanks. Nice to be part of it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, just before we sign off here, I do want to remind everyone of Forum Connect, which is the National Trust online community, which is free and open to anyone. We want to continue this conversation. And for members of Main Street America, you can also use The Point, our membership community at mainstreet.org/thepoint to get connected. So those are resources where we can continue to talk about all of these issues and get answers also from experts in the field who tend to hover on those platforms. I also want to make sure that you understand, again, that you can go back to your InReach account and view recordings of these sessions. This recording will be available in about 48 hours, but we're also posting all of these programs on the Main Street America YouTube channel, sharing that with Preservation Leadership Forum. We want as many people as possible to be informed advocates. And I just want to take a moment as our program closes also to remind you of the ongoing pushes right now for more support for the historic tax credit via the current potential relief bill coming through. HR 2 was passed in Congress and is now up for consideration. There is a possibility there for temporary increases to the historic tax credit. You can definitely learn more about that through both the Preservation Leadership Forum and the Historic Tax Credit Coalition. And then also Main Street America has a current push to advocate to the Senate and to Congress broadly for support for Main Street at this time. You can learn more about that at mainstreet.org/speakupformainstreet. Also right from our homepage, you should be able to access information at mainstreet.org. So this is ongoing at every moment. We know all of our partner organizations have potential asks at any given moment too, and we want to support everyone out there in the ways that they're advocating for preservation in Main Street right now. So once again, thank you so much to Peggy, Rebecca, and Meg for joining us today. And that will conclude our program.